Okay. Before we begin, I would like to start off with a few housekeeping rules. Okay. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please send a chat message to COMTO National. We will hold our Q&A portion of the webinar for the end. If you have any questions during the webinar, please hold them until the end when we open up for our Q&A. This call is being recorded and will be made available on the COMTO website. Another quick note about the audio, you can only use one audio method, meaning you cannot use both your computer audio and phone. So if you're getting some feedback, please make sure you're only using one of those. And also, please turn off your cameras during the presentation so we can focus on the presenter. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Sandy Michael McDonald, Broward County Director of Office of Economic and Small Business Development. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Dante. And thank you, COMTO, for the invite, as well as for allowing me this opportunity this morning and afternoon, or based on where you are, to share some information about PPP and EIDL. Again, my name is Sandy McDonald, and I'm the Director of the Office of Economic and Small Business Development here in Broward County, South Florida. As a COMTO member, we're sorry you're not able to join us this year as we are preparing to host the national conference, but certainly we're looking forward to having you here with us next year in South Florida, right here in Broward County, as we move forward and celebrate 50 years of COMTO. But again, as the Director of the Economic Development and Small Business Office, I'm responsible for assuring that economic development and small business opportunities happen for our businesses here in Broward County. I have a program which is a local certification to make sure that at least 25% of what Broward County procures, we procure from our small, women, and minority-owned businesses. And I'm also the DBE LO, and you know that as the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Liaison Officer for the program of the 49 CFR Part 23 and 26, which regulates the DBE and the ACDBE program. So we too administer that exclusive women and minorities program to assure that there's true DBE opportunities whenever Broward County spends Department of Transportation funds. But today I'm going to come to you as that director who on behalf of the economic development side of our office works with our small businesses throughout the year, but especially during this period of the crisis we all know is COVID, to assure that there were resources, there was technical assistance, and there was aid from our office, inclusive of county, state, and federal funding, to help navigate our small businesses primarily through this crisis. I'm focusing on the PPP and the EIDL today, primarily due to the fact that they were the initial funds made available to small businesses as a part of this CARES Act and a part of this funding. I need to say, as I've said now, I guess it was 8 times, I've done different presentations. I'm not the expert. If you found one, please give me their name and number. We all understand these programs coming from the federal treasury were fluid. We see that they were smart enough to believe that based on EIDL, let's marry it to the SBA, and the PPP, they married it to the banks. But in the end, there was a lot of reading that needed to go and that needed to happen. And agencies and organizations like ours, and with partners that I've used, were the ones to make sure that our small businesses understood. So again, my day job is on behalf of economic development and small business. We work with small, minority, and women-owned businesses every day. This new crisis was just another opportunity to try to help stabilize our businesses as well as move them through this crisis and move them forward. So with that, we're going to get into today's presentation. Next slide, please, Melton. So we're going to start with PPP. And when I was originally working with National, we were actually trying to get this workshop to happen towards the end of June, early July, because it would have took a different turn. It was primarily designed to talk about do's and don'ts, because at that time, as you recall, PPP was coming to an end. June 30th, it was supposed to end. Well, we all now know PPP didn't end. It's actually been extended to August 8th. And with that, I find myself, which is a good thing, sharing more again about those who can still take advantage of this opportunity who can still work, and I say this for my women, minority, and small businesses, who can work with small banking lenders, credit unions, as well as CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. I still find them to be some of the best resources for completing the PPP application. Not that you can't get that done with the big boys. I just haven't noticed more of the big banks willing to hold the hand and willing to have more access with the smaller businesses than we currently have between the credit unions, smaller banks, and the community development financial institutions. So let's put that on the record. PPP is still receiving applications. But the entire intent of PPP was designed, and still is designed, to allow the business to maintain their employees, to keep them on the payroll, to not move them immediately to the unemployment benefits and compensation. So that's extremely important for us to recognize. That was the intent. And they wanted to take what was your historical data, the last 2 years, but primarily your last year, and to make a determination of what your cost factors were, and then to give you a multiplier, 2.5 times that average monthly payroll, as a way to submit an application. So again, we're still encouraging. PPP is live and well. Check with your bank or check with a smaller bank, a credit union, or CDFI, and let them guide you through that process. By time we're doing this, there was still somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 to $100 billion remaining. Next slide, please. So with the PPP being extended, one of the things that we did the last 3 weeks, primarily since June 5th, I guess would be, we began to share what some of the different opportunities are for those who had originally received it, and these align themselves with the new applicants as well. We took what was an original forgiveness period that was originally slated for 8 weeks. We're under the new flexible rules. That's now a 24-week period. If you recall, when PPP first hit the street, the objective was 75% or more needed to be spent on payroll or payroll-related expenses. Well, they gave flexibility. Now only 60% of the actual loan needs to be spent on payroll and payroll-related expenses. Then we went into the deadlines to bring back police. You had this period when we were going towards an end of June 3rd. As you now know, that now has been extended to the end of the calendar year, December 31st. And another piece of good news in terms of the flexibility of the new rule, when the PPP first hit the street, yes, if it was a loan that wasn't going to be forgiven, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, that loan was due to be paid back in 2 years. With the new flexible rule, that loan will now be allowed to be paid back over a 5-year period. Next slide, please. So, what do we need to know about the PPP application? The key thing at this stage, even though we got a little time, PPP is up and running again till August 8th. Don't have a lot of time, we got a little time. It's important to know if you plan to file for that forgiveness, you're going to actually have to do an application for that forgiveness. So whichever lending institution you used, you want to stay in touch with that lending institution. You want to take that actual form. That's a form. That's an application for forgiveness you actually need to apply for. It's not an automatic. No matter what you believe you're doing with your current bookkeeping, that's an application you're going to have to apply for. It is the Paycheck Protection Program payroll cost. Again, remembering the 60-40 rule. In this regard, if you're going to be going after the forgiveness, you're simply saying that you can demonstrate 60% of what you spent those loan funds for were payroll and payroll-related expenses. Most folks originally thought it was just payroll. Nope, but if you was paying into the insurance benefits, if you was paying into a retirement plan, if you were paying into signature annuities for your employees, payroll and payroll-related expenses all constitute that 60% that you're actually responsible for. And again, just going to the alternative covered period, is the 24 weeks after the first day of the business first pay period following the receipt of funds. So different than other loans. I got my loan from the bank, and 30 days later, the bank wants me to start paying back. No, this is actually set up that 24 weeks is the period, but after the first receipt of the funds, once you officially get your funds, that extended period is when you then have to begin to pay back. So it's not an immediate payback. But again, as you did with the terms, if you got a PPP, or if you're still looking to do the application, I always remind the borrower, take a look at the paperwork, read the terms, have that direct communication with your lending institution to make sure you're clear, especially now, since the rules have been flexed a little bit versus from what they originally were. And again, I said this for the last 8 weeks. I've certainly put emphasis on it the last 2 to 3 weeks when we do these. Even with the information we share, even with the information you read, it is key that as a small business, if you have CPA access, use it. If you have an attorney access, use it. And if not, use that relationship with your lending institution to make sure you're clear about not only the uses, but especially when we get to this piece about the forgiveness, or what's it going to take to make sure that you can put all the documentation forward so that you can take advantage of that forgiveness. Next slide. How to maximize my forgiveness. And that's what this sheet is. And I do believe COMTO National, and I know they do their archive, is going to have this presentation available. So again, I know we got to whisk through it this morning. I know we are going to entertain questions at the end, but it would be good for you to be able to come back to this webinar, see this information, and these could be some of your original or initial questions as you begin to work this through with the financial institution and or your CPA and or your attorney. But some of the things I wanted to go over, again, to maximize this forgiveness, let's make sure we clearly understand payroll, payroll-related expenses, salaries, commissions, payments of cash tips up to an annual rate, employee group and health care, retirement contributions. Again, you know, as an employer, those things that you align annually with your payroll that you as a company pay on behalf or pay into for your employees, all of those are eligible to be considered for the forgiveness as payroll and payroll-related expenses. Non-payroll expenses, interest payments on mortgage obligations. We recognize that mortgages, rents can be paid as a part of proper use of the funds, but they can't be considered a part of the payroll or payroll-related expenses that you then would like to have discounted to make it a part of the 60%. So this row to the right of the mortgage payments, rents under lease, utilities for which services began, interest on other debts, those are eligible expenses, but those are non-payroll expenses. So we want to make sure that when you're going over this paperwork, you understand that there's eligible expenses, and that's that 60-40 rule that you can certainly use the money for, but those don't count up to the 60% you must demonstrate as a part of the payroll and payroll-related expenses that could afford you this total forgiveness. Next slide. How do I document? And that's going to be key. By the time you're working with your financial institution and you're filling out the form for the forgiveness, it's all going to be about what are you uploading? What's your documentation? Payroll, reports from a third-party payroll provider, IRS forms, 941, canceled checks, pay stubs. A lot of you in a lot of different ways as small businesses use tools and platforms to maintain your payroll and your logs and your tabulations. You want to have the best, concise, but to the point payroll data that you can to demonstrate who is being paid, what dollar amounts they're being paid, and that accumulative of that aggregate begins to add towards that 60%. Rent. You want to be able to demonstrate for the proper uses of the dollars, you know, canceled checks, receipts, or similar documentation showing rent payments and copy of lease agreements. The key thing about this slide is that they are going to want documentation, not just for the forgiveness. They're going to want documentation to demonstrate the use of the funds. So it's important, as we know, as any small business, it's always important to have documentation to back up those things that you know. Next slide. So from the PPP, I would like to remind us as we roll into the EIDL, the process is still open. There's funds still available. Even if you go to my website, broward.org/econdev, I have a list of financial institutions that do lending. And I know I'm in South Florida and you say I'm in California. What they got to do with it, Sandy? Some of those lenders are national lenders. Some of those small banks and CDFIs, one of the groups that I continuously toot their horn, the National Development Council, NDC, does a great job. And they also were not just providing technical assistance, they were actually administering and lending funds. So NDC is another group that operates West Coast, East Coast, down here in the South, who also could help someone who was looking to be a brand new applicant for PPP. So definitely check with your local bank, your credit unions, your CDFIs, find out their current process for applying for PPP and still take advantage of that while those funds are still available. And again, August 8th is the date that the program for the second time around comes to a close. And we are hoping, on behalf of all small businesses, that we get to that date, but far more small businesses, far more of our DBEs have had a chance to apply if they hadn't applied. And I certainly want to say, if they have applied, that they dot their I's and they cross their T's and they do what's necessary to be eligible to get that forgiveness. One of the best things that can happen with these funds is to find a way to assure that you can dot that I, cross that T, and get these funds completely forgiven, and you can continue to sustain your business and move forward. But for our EIDL, our Economic Injury Disaster Loan, this too was a program that rolled out its second round. It was originally set up for small businesses, set up for independent contractors, 1099 workers, and then it took the agricultural group, and then it came back and it opened it up to everyone. So EIDL is still open. It's right now open to everyone. What we do need to say about the EIDL, if you recall in the beginning, when you did your application for an EIDL loan, you were also submitting an application for that grant, that original grant based on employees of $1,000 to $10,000. Well, that portion of the grant is now over. The federal government has exhausted $20 billion. So the EIDL as a loan application is still here, is still continuing, but the $1,000 up to $10,000 grant, that has been exhausted and that portion is over. Again, for the EIDL, there is no cost to apply. There is no obligation to take the loan. And that part is key. When we were really into this in the beginning, I used to remind our businesses, apply for everything. You still have the time once you apply to make a determination which lending, borrowing opportunity is best. You don't want to take this opportunity and consider it free money, because as you know better than I, ain't no free money. But you do want to make sure that your use of these funds advantage you, not only during this interruption, but puts you in a position that's sustainable. You don't want to borrow money that you can't pay back. You don't want to borrow money where terms aren't favorable. Now, I want to be clear, as we talk a little bit more about the EIDL, these are some favorable terms. The interest rates as well as the periods to pay back. But yet and still, I've had businesses who received the EIDL. I've had businesses who received the PPP. And at the end of the day, they really only needed one. And based on their decision, they now have long-term decisions. How do I not only leverage, but how do I put myself in a position to make sure I can pay this back timely, especially on the PPP? If I can't demonstrate the forgiveness, I got 5 years and they got to be paid back anyway. So we want to just make sure that you understand the EIDL is a favorable lending situation based on your dollar amount. And again, the maximum unsecured loan is $25,000, secured up to $2 million. Small businesses, 3.75 interest. Most nonprofits and even our church affiliations, 2.75%. And terms. Some terms are as long as up to 30 years. So again, this could be a very good loan, but at the end of the day, of course, you wouldn't want to take 30 years to pay it back. But having that room to pay back a loan and to create that relationship with the SBA, we need to recognize we did our PPP with a financial institution. You're doing your EIDL directly with the SBA. And you do recall the SBA has other lending products and programs. So if you've never established a relationship with the SBA, through this crisis, you have this opportunity to establish this relationship with the SBA. And this relationship and borrowing these funds and paying these funds back timely and paying these funds back before the term period is ended puts you in a good position with the SBA for future lending opportunities and development opportunities based on your business. So that's another way to look at this as the immediate need, the crisis need, but establishing a relationship with a major partner who's here by design for small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. Next slide. How EIDL funds can be used, of course, fixed debt, of course, accounts payables, things that got to go out that door, of course, payroll, no different than the PPP, keeping in mind, this is a loan. There isn't a chance down the road for forgiveness. This is really all about the loan. And of course, some bills that could have been paid had the disaster not occurred. All of this is tied to the CARES Act and the federal treasury believing, with the support of the Senate and the Congress, that we needed to do something for our small businesses based on interruptions or based on the reduction of sales or valuable opportunities because of some of these stay-home orders and or shutdown orders. So again, there's some bills that can be paid as a part of this EIDL loan that was actually directly and indirectly caused due to what we all just had to go through with the COVID. So again, EIDL is going through your SBA. The application is still online. The forgiveness is over. But again, they even have the FAQ, frequently asked questions about what you can and can't do even with these funds. Next slide. So the PPP Loan Forgiveness, do's and don'ts. So the next few slides, we're getting ready to dive in, if you were with us at the beginning of the webinar, to what we were really looking to do when we thought the program was coming to an end. But since it didn't come to an end, I wanted to take the first few minutes to go over the PPP again, to go over the EIDL. But this is what we really want to talk about today. Small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses, we have enough trouble navigating our day-to-day. We don't want to invite new trouble by taking what we think is free money. We don't want to invite new trouble by not following what we actually said and we're signing those term agreements that we would use funds for. So we want to be crystal clear, and my office is currently working with the businesses here in Broward County to assure that any of our businesses that got the PPP and the EIDL, we understand not only what to do and not to do, but we're beginning to roll out how to make sure the loan forgiveness can happen. Next slide. So PPP Forgiveness Loan Application. As we prepare to go into this loan application, the do's and the don'ts have clear knowledge of eligible expenses. I went over some of those. The website on behalf of your lending institution where you got the funds still have that information. You can also get that information today off the SBA.gov website. And again, I do believe that National will keep this webinar up so you can come back to these points if you would like. Be aware, rules are constantly still changing, but to your advantage, you have to be notified. You definitely need to follow, because again, you're going to be submitting an application for forgiveness, and that means you're going to be speaking directly to the financial institution by which you got this loan. But again, just understand, rules today really could change 3 weeks from now. We know today, rules from 2 months ago did change, and we're into this new period. So we just want to, and again, going back to what I said earlier, the reason why there's no action is because at the end of the day, we're not even doing what we originally set out to do. And as they change, we all have to read and we all have to catch up. Assemble required documentation. This is just a fundamental of making sure, like anything, before I start something, Let me make sure that I have my categories in line. Let me make sure I got my organization set up so I know everything that I'm dealing with, everything I'm required to have. And again, you're just putting yourself in position to give the best application for forgiveness. If you have employees, delegate the assembly. Some of the things that we were encouraging some of my smaller businesses to do during this period, they weren't actually active yet. So as they were preparing, we were saying, use your employees. You're paying them anyway. That's what the PPP funds were. And if we had a shutdown, people weren't actually coming into the business. So begin to prepare yourself. And if you have additional staff, use your staff to do it. But if not, this is the time to begin to be organized so that when it's time for your forgiveness application, you will have everything you need to submit that. Next slide. PPP Forgiveness Loan Application do's and don'ts. What not to do. Of course, we know. Do not wait until the last minute to begin your forgiveness loan application. Don't omit any required supporting documents. That's what that second slide was about, the supporting documents. You really need to provide exactly what they're going to be asking as supporting documents. You really need to provide it in a manner that is going to be acceptable to them. Again, those are some of the conversations that you're going to have the devil in the detail with your lending institution as you're preparing to complete that form. Don't fail to respond to any questions on the forgiveness loan application. And again, that's where I know my office, along with our lending partners, and I'm proud to say that we have some lending partners that were willing to take PPP applicants, even if those small businesses were not members of their bank. We're still working with those same lending partners, and they're going to be willing to work with our folks to aid these borrowers as they get ready for the forgiveness aspect. So I can't say that's going to happen all over the country, but that's one of the things you want to check. Who in your area is still going to be willing to help the small business to complete the forgiveness application? Hopefully you're working with a lending institution where you got your PPP from that's willing to do so. But if not, check to see if there's any CDFIs, those community development financial institutions. Check to see if there's any smaller banks. Check to see if there's any credit union. Check to see if you have any local offices of economic development and small business who has staff with capacity who's also willing to do it. Those are some of the ways you can get these services done, or you can get the necessary support or technical assistance and maybe not have to pay for that for the forgiveness application. Next slide. Ineligible uses of the PPP loan, as we know, dividend and bonuses, disbursements to owners, etc., except when directly related to performance. Yes, an owner can count his or her salary as a part of the salaries, but not disbursements to owners other than that, the bonuses and things of that nature. Repayment of stockholders and principal loans, except when the funds were injected as an interim basis to get through the disaster. So again, if there were some agreements that was happening that was trying to offset what was going to be detrimental to the business, that the ownerships or the managers or the managing partners put some funds in, those were eligible uses now to be considered and paid back, but not just traditional repayments to stockholders. Expansions of facilities or acquisitions, this was not the time to take the PPP funds and say, I want to add on a new 30,000 square foot to the building, or I wanted to do major facility acquisitions in terms of buying new property to have the Outback warehouse. That wasn't the intent. Repair or replacement of physical damages, this was also not designed through the PPP that would be an eligible use. Next slide. Other ineligible uses, of course, refinancing long-term debt, paying down, including regular installments of payments, payments of any other part of a direct federal or debt. Again, PPP, a little different than EIDL. PPP was really designed to try to do the things to maintain employees and the things related to maintaining employees, as well as meet the obligations of your business and your organization. So all those things that probably really would be helpful in addition to that for you and your business, they're not eligible. So again, we don't want you recording those. We don't want you creating that documentation. We don't want you submitting that to end up being denied and then determination made that you have to pay back your entire loan. A relocation was not a part of this. Other ineligible uses, are available online. They still have their websites up. The SBA even speaks to eligible and ineligible based on the PPP. And I'm sure the same holds true for your lending institution. They got that FAQ, that frequently asked question sheet, that would also tell you some of those eligible and ineligible activities. Next slide. And this is the other part of the rubber meet the road that when we were originally setting out, when I was speaking with National, when we thought the PPP was ending, that we really wanted to get to. And this is the portion that we'll get to before we end up getting to the questions and the answers. Folks, we're reminding all of our small businesses, especially all of my minority and women-owned businesses, that it's a business decision. We all know the need due to the crisis, but it's a business decision if you decide to take these funds. And as a business, with your contract and any other terms and agreements you have with other loans, you're attesting that what you're introducing is open, true, and honest. There is a situation by which some of this, much of this, based on who you are or where you are, will be vetted. This is the portion where I just did this workshop for our group locally last week, where we're saying this is about business. It never was about free money. And it's clear to us in some of the federal treasurer conversations, or more, not conversations, webinars that we've been attending, that they are looking to prosecute those who fraudulently submit applications, and certainly those who fraudulently receive the funds under this federal crisis. So this is the piece where we just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge it's not just in passing. Unfortunately, there's actual, based on different states, target teams already formed. At the same time, we're reviewing applications, and applications are still being submitted for opportunity for small businesses who are in need. We also have from the Treasury target groups being formed who are actually targeting to make sure that the funds aren't fraudulent. On behalf of economic development and small business, that is a good thing, because if it's not being fraudulently used, that means there's more money available in the pot for the small businesses who really need it. My challenge with this is, knowing that this is true, I don't want those targeted, and I don't want to read the numbers about those who are accused or who are found guilty to be the small businesses, the minority businesses, and the women businesses who have put in all the sweat and tears over the years to try to get ahead. So again, it's never been about free money, but I just wanted to be clear, as I got through saying to our business organization last week, it's real, and there's cases today where they're now taking a look at people submitting fraudulent applications, and more importantly, people receiving funds and not using it for the purposes intended. Next slide. And the thing about this, and the next few slides are doing the same, is the reality that you don't need me to tell you this. You're in business. You understand what business is responsible for. You understand your do's and your don'ts. If you just want to get some more examples of the kind of things they're looking for, you can go to Google and Bing and immediately just put in PPP fraud, and you'll get all the current alleged cases, accusation of cases, and there's actually some actual cases right now that are actually being prosecuted. And again, we wanted to get to this point because I know that even when we were presenting this and we knew about the struggles and we knew about the challenges when PPP and EIDL first came, and we all heard that for the first round of PPP, small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses didn't have access to the funds. So the federal government heard the same, so they came with a second round and even carved out more money and tried to encourage us, which was a good thing, to go to the smaller banks, the credit unions, and the CDFIs. All of that made sense. But it all made sense for the reason and the purpose as originally driven, to help sustain the small business. So even then, it was never to be considered free money. But more importantly, now that we've submitted these applications, small businesses, minority business, and women-owned businesses are actually getting funds, and they're now spending those funds to sustain their business. You must be alerted that they're now targeting and taking a look at and trying to assure that everyone who got the money uses it wisely and uses it according to the guidelines And again, as I said in my webinar last week with my business community, I can't get into the tit for tat about what happened to the big banks, about the Lakers, about the Ruth Chris of the world, and about the majors who also got these funds, who are publicly traded companies. Again, based on standards, SBA, 1 to 500 employees, a lot was eligible, even if it wasn't the spirit and the intent, and you were trying to get it to the smallest of small. I wouldn't want none of my businesses to use what we knew happened as an excuse to do something that was not proper and end up in one of these headlines. So this is why our office shared this information with our businesses. And as you know, if you are a DBE, we get the annual report of all of those who are fraudulently taking advantage of the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program as well. So again, Uncle Sam doesn't mind doing this as well as telling it. I use it as a tool to make sure our small businesses recognize that I don't want you scrutinized when I know you're going to be scrutinized. So if we can help you on the front end, let's help you on the front end to do the right thing. Next slide. Another one of the examples of some misuse of funds as alleged to an owner of a specific major retail and what they didn't do or what they did use with those funds. Next slide. Again, this is still going to be on the national website. So again, I just wanted to grab some of these to show you that it's happening now. But again, for someone who works for small businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, I'm trying to make sure none of my businesses end up as a tagline. It's not worth it. Next slide. And again, another example of a Utah owner. Again, I read that story A through Z, and again, just fraudulently submitting of information, and at the end of the day, misuse of dollars and funds, and here we go. And the next slide. Here is the Paycheck Protection Program report. The reason why this is important, and we want to give you the link, they do a report every 4 to 5 weeks of the spending. I'm not getting ready to get into that debate why the federal government isn't going to give every single name. They even just came up with a new list, but every single name of every business who got the funds. We do know the public traded companies, that list is available. And we do know through this report, they tell you which states got the money. They tell you how much each state got. They tell it by a breakdown of industry. This report also tells you the key lenders, which lenders lent and how much. So it's just an important report to have. The reason why I want to have it, because I want to take a look at the state of Florida. I want to take a look at the region of our country. I want to find out based on the applicants I'm aware of, as those that's down in Miami, those in Palm Beach. I want to make sure that those based on who they are by demographics, I want to see who had a fair shake, because I don't believe we're at the end of all of this. This is going to be some more data and some more information that will allow us to beef up our case of what we know to be a true need and stabilizing and supporting small, minority, and women-owned businesses. You know, the same thing that we take a look at when we're looking at government contracting. What is really being carved out, not as a handout, but carved out to assure that there's fair and equitable opportunities. I'm looking and charting each one of these reports because I want to know not only what's happening in my state, but what's happening across the country, and both of those in relationship to the small businesses I'm responsible for right here in South Florida. So I just wanted to share this slide with you because you need to know the PPP actually does have a report. Sorry, once again, as you've heard, they're not listing every single business by name. So your name is not out here to be given to the world. But in this report, they are talking about the states. They're talking about the industries. They're talking about the lending institutions. And they do have access through the SBA site and through this report site of any publicly traded company that also got PPP funds. Next slide. And there, folks, we take it to the end. We talked about this. We wanted to see if we can get a good 40, 45 minutes in of just sharing information about PPP and EIDL, because we did want to make sure we can do 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. So I do know that I probably went through that pretty fast. But again, PPP is still an active application. EIDL is still an active loan application. We are encouraging those of you who have not applied, if you're in need, still apply. And let's be crystal clear. If you're not sure you're in need, still apply. Because if the loan becomes available, you still get to make a decision if you want to accept it or not. But you don't want to be in a position that I think I need it, but I'm not sure I need it. And then you get to that August 7th date when this ends in August 8th and it's actually over. Or you don't want to run the risk that even EIDL, which is still a continuation, sends us an email later on simply saying those funds are gone too. So again, the programs are still active. You can get detailed information about both at the SBA.gov website, even though PPP is being done through bank lenders, and there's a list of lenders for across the country on the SBA website, and the EIDL is actually an application you're submitting to the SBA directly. And again, for me and my office, we want to thank National for allowing us to do this. We are going to put some information up, and I'll share it with National about the Federal Reserve Main Street Lending Program. Some people have heard about it, some haven't heard about it. It's going to end in September, but it's a program that really just rolled out less than 2 weeks ago. Some of the details are still being brought to the surface, but it's really a lending program. 250 million, I'm sorry, 250,000 up to 35 million. There's another area, 250,000 up to 50 million. It's for small and medium-sized businesses. So what you need to know right now, Federal Reserve Main Street Lending Program. You should Google that or look that up on the SBA website, or look that up on the Federal Reserve website and learn more about that and find out which banks are going to be working with small and medium-sized businesses for these funds to be allocated. But with that, I thank you. And Dante, back to you and any questions we may have, sir.
Thank you, no problem. And again, thank you, Mr. Stanley and Michael McDonald, for sharing that valuable information with us. I'm sure our members can take a good amount away from that. And speaking of our members, we do have some questions in the chat, and I'll go in the order in which they have came in. So we have our first question from, and excuse me if I mispronounce your name, we have our first question from Jose Vargas, and he asks, can I submit my PPP Forgiveness application after using up the funds soon after week 12 from receipt of the funds?
The short answer is yes. Communicate with your financial institution first, because once the period of duration is up and you've used, if the application is ready to be received, the answer is yes.
All right, thank you. And we have another question from Ms. Tess Snipes. She asks, do the financial reports required for EIDL loans have to be prepared by a CPA?
Double check me on that, but as I recall, the answer is no. Ms. Snipes, if you don't have any other access, that's my email or my phone number. You can email me that, and I can find that out for you in 5 minutes. But based on the other presentations, I think I recall they didn't have to be certified or audited reports. They were going to have to end up being reports that at the end of the day, your testing is accurate. But I don't believe it needed to be done to that degree. But again, shoot me that real quick, and I'll go back and do my research and get you that answer on the record.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy, for that answer. And looks like we have another question from Mr. Jose Vargas. He asked, in the future, how will lender view firms that receive PPP funds and or EIDL loans from a credit score perspective?
So I'm not going to sit here and act like I understand lending and banks. I do, and what I'm really trying to say, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a lender or a bank. I'm not. But I will tell you this based on working with our partner, Althea Harris, in the Miami district of the SBA. You are placing yourself in a good position, especially on the EIDL, by receiving the funds, meeting all your obligations, paying on time, and even paying that debt back sooner than later. You know you got future backing from the SBA. I would have to assume that the loan on the PPP, which we do know is officially coming from the bank is getting their refund from the federal government along with their fees. I would have to assume you are actually establishing a relationship with that lending institution. Whether you had one before or not, whether you had past loans or not, you now have one. Paying those funds back on time, meeting the conditions of those terms, especially including the forgiveness, I would have to assume, yes, you've made a good impression, but more importantly, you got a running record with that lending institution. How that adds to your credit scores is another story, but I would have to believe you now have an institution who anytime in the future can at least go back into your file and see where there was a loan that they pushed out, even if it did come from the CARES Act, and you paid it on time without any issues. So I'm just going to assume, Mr. Vargas, that it certainly has to put you in a good position. But I will say, that's a lending institution who's already giving you that loan. That's an excellent question directly to ask that lending institution. I'm sure they would love to tell you that answer.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for that answer. It looks like we have another question from Mr. Greg Carbalata. Excuse me if I mispronounced it. He asked, how will PPP funds be accounted for in the FAR audit?
Now, you know what? Great. Now, that's a good question. So how would the PPP be accounted for in the FAR audit? Now, that one, I would say, and again, Dante will do the same. Let me research that answer. That's actually a good question. It's not unique, but it's a good question. And I'm willing to send a response back, Dante, to you for that question. And then that way you can share that with all of our listening audience. So again, if he wants to send me a direct email, I'll certainly research the PPP utilization relevant to that FAR audit and get a solid answer that he could probably stand on.
All right, thank you so much. And let's see, we have any more questions here? Okay, so it looks like we have a question from, I'm sorry, here we are. Mr. Larry Melton. He asked, he says, we received a check directly from the government and not a lender. He asked, do we have to submit a PPP Forgiveness application because of that? This was Larry Melton.
Okay, so Mr. Melton, the question is back to you. You said you received a payment directly from the government, not from a lending institution. I just want to be clear. Was that payment PPP? Because you shouldn't have gotten a PPP payment directly from the government. Did you apply for anything else? Because the PPP, which you would have gotten with a term agreement or sheet from your lending institution, that is a part of the forgiveness application that you then have to submit requesting your forgiveness. That was a communication on the lending side from you and that lending institution. That shouldn't have been a check for you straight from the government. So that would be my question, unfortunately, back to you. You say you got a check directly from the government. And again, that relationship for PPP should have been you and a lending institution. So if we can find out that answer, and again, sir, you too can take my email and send me an email with your phone number. I'll call you and speak to that. But I probably really need to find out, where did that check come from? But your PPP application and your PPP forgiveness application is all going to be a part of the same process for the loan you got from the financial institution you worked with.
Thank you, Sandy. It looks like we have another question from Zainab Adaya. Again, excuse me if I mispronounce your name. This question is, if you received a grant from the EIDL, will they include the approved loan amount with the grant given when grants were given to small businesses that qualify?
So actually, as we know it, no. The process for the EIDL application and grant, especially when it initially started, it changed a little bit towards the end. Folks will remember when it originally started, you really had that chance of up to $10,000. They eventually broke that down, $10,000 to $1,000 per employee, up to 10. But the whole point was you submitted that application as a part of the EIDL loan application. The grant was a part of that request. You were reviewed for the grant. 8 times out of 10, folks received the grant. That $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever they received, that was the grant. It was done. you were allowed to receive the grant. Even if you don't get the future EIDL loan, the grant was yours to keep it moving. The loan is its own consideration. And the loan will tell you when you get your response back what the current condition and the projected amount that's being recommended for the loan. That $1,000 or $2,000 via the grant is not included as a part of that loan. Because remember, folks got the grant and didn't get approved for the actual loan.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. And it looks like we have two questions that came in from Timberland Smith. The questions are, one, how does the EIDL advance affect the PPP? And the other question is, how does the PPP and EIDL affect tax filing?
Okay, so the EIDL advance doesn't affect or impact your PPP. Your EIDL advance, if you received an advance up under the SBA and the EIDL, that advance stands on its own. How does the PPP and the EIDL impact your taxes? So this is what the federal treasury is saying, and this is where I'm saying based on earlier in this webinar. Folks, this is where you want to pay attention to all your IRS rules, and as you prepare your taxes next year, you want to work with your accountant. As we know it today, these funds for your business are being considered as relief support, similar to some of you who may have received, or you know residents who received that $1,200. It's going to have to be reported, but as the IRS and the federal treasurer works out the conditions, they're not supposed to negatively impact you on the revenue side because they're being considered as relief. But even we were told this is the portion of PPP and EIDL you and your attorney, or you and your tax accountant, or you and your CPA, you want to stay on top of that, because I'm not saying that that's the portion that's moving fluidly, but it is the portion that's moving, and you want to be crystal clear. But as a part of the original language, these relief funds were not designed to end up in the tax means being punitive, because they were funds that's being offset by the government because of the crisis. But that's just something that you want to follow through. And that's not something I'm going to fake on the accounting side or CPA side, because even my shop and my staff, that's something we're walking through and reading as we go through this process. And we too are encouraging our folks to stay in touch with the reviews and with the statements of notifications that are coming from the federal treasurer as well as the IRS as they begin to tweak this for what will be next year's business tax season.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It looks like we have another question that came in from Mr. Jose Vargas. He asked, and this is kind of similar to your answer just now, but maybe you can get some more insight. But he asked, how does the EIDL advance of $10,000 interact with the PPP loan?
So the advance, and that is similar to the last person. You can actually, and you should actually, separate the two. EIDL as a loan application, EIDL as a grant is totally separate. Keep in mind PPP. PPP is asking you about payroll and payroll-related expenses to demonstrate not just the hardship, your forgiveness request. I know that it sounds as if you're leaning like, but yes, Mr. McDonald, I got an EIDL advance. I got that grant that was revenue coming in that I used, or I was supposed to use, to offset some of the expenses or to pay my employees. That's actually a plus for you. That's payment in, not payment out. PPP on the forgiveness wants you to demonstrate based on the funds you received from PPP, that you use 60% of that to meet payroll expenses, not funds that you may have had in the bank, your savings, or from another lending opportunity. So I know you want to combine the two. My 2 cents, don't. Double, triple check with your business accountant or your CPA. But in the end, you apply for an EIDL loan. You will eventually, during your taxes, have to demonstrate revenue coming in, even from this relief piece. And as I just said, eventually you're going to get new language from IRS and from the federal treasurer explaining how to do that. But your PPP was separate. What did you use these funds for? Can you demonstrate that 60% or more was used to maintain your employees, was used for payroll related expenses? If so, that's separate. Those two will eventually be filed with your taxes, but you'll be following whatever the rules are based on what you and I both are going to find out later from the federal government and the IRS. But I wouldn't state to you that now, even in your use, they're married. They're not married.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. Looks like we have one more question here from Mr. Zainab Adaya Saka. The question is, do you have to pay taxes on the grant received from the EIDL?
That's the one that we're trailing, that you're trailing. That grant received was revenue coming in. It was revenue coming in for your business. We both know it's going to eventually have to be reported. We're both waiting to see from the IRS and the federal treasury when we report it, what new code, if any, but we're hoping it's a new code, what new code next year for tax purposes are they going to give us to write that off? That's what we're looking for. So again, that's the part we're trailing right now.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. From the looks of it, it looks like there's no more questions coming in. But just for the sake of our members, I would just like to ask, what is the one thing or the main ideas that our members that participate on this webinar should take away from this presentation?
So some of the key points to take away is that if we did this 3 weeks ago, I'm screaming, hurry up, because PPP was coming to an end on June 30th. First takeaway, there are still active funds for PPP and EIDL. For wherever you didn't consider it, if you consider it, there's still active funds. So you need to decide if you want to submit an application. Second thing to take away, folks, that's just business in general. No such thing as free money. There's responsibility and consequences for receiving these funds and not using them in the manner that they were designed to be used. And the last takeaway, you are a business first. You do the things legally that are in the best interest of you and your business. Make all your dealings, including how you use federal funds or any other future loans or financing opportunities. Make business decisions that value you and your business. You've come too far as a business, specifically a minority, a woman, or a small business, to make a mistake that costs you your business. Those would be my 3 takeaways.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of COMTO National, we all really appreciate it. We had a great amount of questions. You gave an awesome presentation. This will be vital information, not only for our members, but for our DBEs and small businesses that are with COMTO. So with that, again, my name is Dante Flair, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. And again, on behalf of COMTO National, we would love to thank Mr. Sandy Michael McDonald again for actually hosting a second webinar with us. This is his second webinar. So we would love to thank him for that. And we really appreciate everyone's participation and engagement today. So with that, if there are no more questions, I will be more than glad to end this webinar. And Sandy, was there anything else you would like to add before we close?
No, again, thank National for allowing these to happen. And again, National has a series of development workshops for the DBEs and other small businesses. I would encourage any of our listeners to make sure, Dante, they get with the National website, follow these and pay attention to these, and to reach out. And on behalf of National, I certainly have to say, if you're not a member, if you know other DBEs who are not members, you want to join. You want to understand that it's not only a vast amount of information that we're trying to make available, but we're trying to move forward to make sure that there's true resources to grow and sustain minority and women-owned businesses, specifically our DBEs, but more importantly, to make sure that there's real contractual opportunities for you. And these webinars are just some of the ways. So again, thanks National for hosting these. Thank you, Dante, and the rest of the team for being the administrator of this. And again, thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Of course, it is our absolute pleasure. And again, everyone, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our COMTO website in the next coming days. So thank you all so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.